Hello everyone and welcome to Mr. Saucedo's YouTube videos. Today we're going to be talking about animals and how animals use and obtain energy. So we already talked about photosynthesis and how plants do this. So photosynthesis is kind of complementary though to the animal version, which is cellular respiration. So in cellular respiration, animals are converting sugar into ATP. And remember, ATP is that standardized energy carrying molecule that all cells on Earth use. So the first step of that process is called cellular respiration. I'm going to abbreviate it as CR, and it is the process of converting carbon-based molecules like sugar into energy in the form of ATP. So where does this take place? Well, the primary organelle is the mitochondria, and mitochondria are basically in cells specifically to convert glucose or sugar into ATP. And so here's kind of the general flow. There are three parts to cellular respiration here. And so what we're going to be talking about is kind of the details of each one of those. Now, this isn't AP. You don't need to know like crazy details of every step, every molecule that gets made along the way. But we do want to keep track of like ATP, what's going in, what's going out, and then also kind of a little bit in general where it's happening inside of the cell. So the majority of ATP are made through the mitochondria. We just said that, right? And there are two key parts to the mitochondria. So remember, for photosynthesis, we had the chloroplast, and the chloroplast had like two key parts. Well, the mitochondria also has two key parts on the inside. In fact, it looks even a little simpler than the chloroplast does. The first part is called the cristae. So cristae are these little individual zigzag lines that you see, and they are basically folds. So it's kind of like you took a paper towel maybe or something, and you started folding it. And as you fold it, this is kind of the pattern that you're left with. And so those are the zigzag shapes that you see. Also, we have what we call the matrix. The matrix is what fills the inside of the mitochondria. It is a fluid. It's kind of gel-like. And if you want to actually see what the inside of mitochondria really looks like, this is kind of what it looks like if you were to slice it in half. So you can see these little kind of protuberances. Those are all going to be the cristae. And then the kind of darker stuff that you see on the inside there, those would all be the matrix. That would be all fluid on the inside. So if you want to label it, right, the cristae is the important part. The matrix is the important part. Those are the two parts that we really care about for this. All right, so what's the first step in cellular respiration? The first step or first part in cellular respiration is called glycolysis. So glyco means glucose, so sugar, right? Lyse or lysis means to break apart, to destroy. And so it literally means glucose breaking. So this takes place though inside of the cytoplasm. This does not take place in the mitochondria itself. This is the only step that doesn't take place in the mitochondria. It takes place in the cytoplasm of the cell. So a glucose molecule is broken down in a 10-step process called glycolysis. These are the actual steps. And you're like, wow, I'm glad I'm not in like AP Bio. And so this is kind of the flow chart of kind of what is happening and what gets manufactured along the way as glycolysis occurs. But remember, all we care about is what happens in, like, what are we producing? So we produce 2 ATP net and 2 NADH at the end of glycolysis. So hey, remember when I said that plants use NADPH? Guess what animal cells use? NADH. So again, ATP is the primary one. NADH can do some cool stuff. But again, we only really care about the results. And so like it says, NADH is an energy carrying molecule found in animal cells. Do not confuse it with NADPH, which is found in plant cells. They're not the same thing. Okay. And also, last but certainly not least, the first part of this is anaerobic. You do not need any oxygen in order to do glycolysis. So the reason why we breathe in oxygen is not because of glycolysis. Okay. Second part, that's called the Krebs cycle, also sometimes called the citric acid cycle. This takes place in the matrix of the mitochondria. So now we're finally in the mitochondria. And there is a 10-step series apparently, they really like 10 steps. So it's a 10-step series of chemical reactions. And if you want to know what those are, they're right here. And again, you're probably like, oh my God, right? So here's a general diagram of the Krebs cycle. What do we produce, though? We produce CO2 as a waste product in the Krebs cycle. This, though, does require oxygen in order to occur. So in order to do the Krebs cycle, you do need oxygen. And what do we make? We produce 2 ATP and 6 NADH in the Krebs cycle. Third part, the electron transport chain. Sometimes that's abbreviated as the ETC. Either one of those is totally fine. That takes place in the cristae of the mitochondria. This is also aerobic. 6 oxygen molecules are going to enter. They're going to pick up some electrons and hydrogen in order to produce 12 H2O. And we produce 32 ATP. Yes, that's a lot of ATP in this final step. Here's actually what it looks like, and it is super cool. But again, you can see this is the membrane of the cell. And so first things first, we have NADH oxidation there in the corner. Boom. Making NAD+. Electrons are being transported. Water molecules are going to be dissociating. Boom, energy is being transferred. Those electrons are getting moved. That's why it's called the electron transport chain. And by the time we get to that last little part, so by the time we get to the end there, what ends up happening is NADPH is going to pick up some energy in order to make a high energy bond to make ATP. And that is the electron transport chain. It's pretty cool. Now, what's the equation for cellular respiration? So the equation for cellular respiration is glucose plus oxygen gives us CO2 and water, right? And so again, just like we had our kind of diagram for photosynthesis, this is our diagram for cellular respiration. So glycolysis is happening in the cytoplasm. It's happening just floating around anywhere in the cell. And keep in mind that we get a net of 2 ATP from that. Okay, we end up inside of the mitochondria. I almost called it the stroma. Wow, that would have been wrong. Inside of the matrix of the mitochondria, we get a net of 2 ATP. The electron transport chain, all of those little cristae that are like these little finger-like projections, the electron transport chain is happening, and that's where we get 32. So we have a net of 36 ATP that are made in cellular respiration. So keep in mind though, right, cellular respiration is like a mirror image of photosynthesis. They are basically opposites. So we have right here the equation for photosynthesis. Here we have the equation for cellular respiration. They're mirror images of each other. Also keep in mind something pretty cool. Mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA and their own ribosomes. So they have their own, like they reproduce on their own, which is kind of cool. Mitochondria will basically reproduce like bacteria and make little copies and little clones of themselves. They have their own ribosomes. In fact, you could see them. I was going to point them out in that original little microscope slide picture. But those dark little things that you saw were mitochondrial ribosomes. And so they do, though. They have their own little system in there, which leads us to believe, when we talk about evolution and genetics and stuff, we'll probably get into more detail, but that originally mitochondria and chloroplasts were probably bacteria that got picked up by cells and then ended up being advantageous for both the cell and for the bacteria. And so slowly but surely they became an organelle, like part of the cell that was necessary in order for it to survive. And so that's it.